So it's just been confirmed that HBO has officially cast one of the centaurs, Ronan, for the new Harry Potter series. To me, it's another great sign that the show is going to stay faithful to the books whilst expanding upon the wizarding world, this time with centaur lore. And on the topic of staying faithful to the books, I saw a few comments on my previous video about me cutting a couple of scenes and that I should avoid doing that if I want to stay faithful to the books. That is a fair point, but as you'll see soon, a lot of those cut scenes are still going to make an appearance. And from this point on, the story will really slow down as this episode only really covers 2 chapters. So let's dive into my vision for HBO's Harry Potter Season 3, Episode 3, Grim Defeat. We open on a bustle of students, all squeezing through the Great Hall doors into the Great Hall, and we see Professor Dumbledore standing at the front, waiting for them. He tells the students that the staff need to conduct a thorough search of the castle, and with a flick of his wand, conjures up hundreds of purple sleeping bags. We see snappy shots of students scrambling for sleeping bags and finding good spots to sleep in, before we focus on a group of Gryffindor students all chatting loudly and theorising about how Sirius Black came into the castle. And in the book we hear quite a few students, some of whom are unnamed, making suggestions, and once again that just expands upon the student life at Hogwarts, and it's definitely something I will include here. We then cut to a few hours ahead where the majority of the students are asleep, but then we see Harry, Ron and Hermione, who are all still awake, muttering to each other. At that point, Dumbledore enters the hall and proceeds, like in the movie, to have a conversation with Snape and Percy, almost word for word what we got there. We see Snape casting suspicions about a certain appointment Dumbledore has made, which he shuts down instantly. The camera pans down to the trio, who are all staring at each other in confusion and silence, before we cut to black and the title sequence rolls. Before we properly jump into the episode, please remember to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Please like the video and hit the notification bell, as I'm going to be bringing out my vision for Season 3 every single week. After the title sequence, we cut to the trio heading up to the Gryffindor dormitory, where they find Sir Cadogan, who has replaced the Fat Lady. After a brief and funny exchange, the trio enter the common room and they find Oliver Wood and the rest of the Quidditch team waiting for Harry. Wood informs the team that they're now going to be playing Hufflepuff, not Slytherin, in their upcoming match, as they say Malfoy's arm is too injured, although the team correctly guesses that the real reason is because the team don't want to play in the dreadful weather. Wood also mentions Cedric Diggory, which is the first nod to this character, as in the movie we only meet him in Goblet of Fire. But it's quite important to introduce him in this season, in my opinion, as Harry and Cedric have a complicated relationship. The Quidditch team's meeting is then interrupted as Crookshanks leaps at Scabbers, and this leads to a brief and frantic chase around the common room with people trying to catch Crookshanks before Ron goes to save Scabbers. The first major argument between Ron and Hermione from this season then erupts, and I definitely want these arguments to pop up all the way through the season, just as they do in the book, as it's a pretty major point. Now, in the previous episode I mentioned I had cut the potions lesson that takes place before the Boggart lesson, but don't worry, we're getting it now. After the Boggart lesson, the book goes on to explain how Snape must have heard about Neville's Boggart and proceeds to be even nastier than usual, and even though I have reshuffled things ever so slightly, this plays perfectly into the upcoming lesson. We cut to the Gryffindors and Slytherins waiting outside the potions classroom, and we see Lavender Brown in tears being comforted by other Gryffindors. She says that she just received news that her baby rabbit was killed and that she should have known because Professor Trelawney predicted it. Hermione then logically questions the prediction, saying that the rabbit was probably killed earlier and that if it was a baby rabbit, how could Lavender be dreading it dying? Ron goes on to say,
"Don't mind Hermione, Lavender. She doesn't think other people's pets matter very much."
Once again deepening the rift between Ron and Hermione, Hermione that plays such an important part in this season. Inside the classroom, we see Snape prowling amongst the students, criticising their shrinking solutions. When he reaches Neville, he goes on to insult the colour of his potion and announces that he will feed a drop of his potion to Trevor the Toad at the end of the class, forbidding Hermione to help him. Neville whispers to Hermione,
"Help me!"
before we cut to Harry and Ron, who are sharing a table with Malfoy, who still has his arm in a sling. Malfoy smugly orders them to prepare his ingredients for him and goes on to goad Harry about Sirius Black, saying,
"If it was me, I'd want revenge. I'd hunt him down myself."
And this sets up a key thread for later in the episode. The sequence then ends with Snape feeding a drop of potion to Trevor. The tension builds and builds until we hear a pop and Trevor shrinks to the size of a tadpole. However, as the Gryffindors are cheering, Snape flicks his wand, returning Trevor to full size, and says,
5 points from Gryffindor. I told you not to help him, Miss Granger.
We cut to black to end Sequence 1. Sequence 2 covers 2 main scenes that were actually included in the Prisoner of Azkaban movie, so here they will just be more expanded. We open on the exterior of Hogwarts during a violent storm, which will set up the conditions Harry has to face in the Quidditch match. And when we cut to the interior of Hogwarts, we see Harry rushing through the corridors, being tailed by Oliver Wood, who is shouting suggestions at him like,
"Diggory's got a very fast swerve, Harry, so you might want to try looping him."
We follow Harry as he hurtles round corners, squeezes through groups of students, before he bursts into the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, and he freezes in shock as he sees Snape standing at the front of the class. As I mentioned before, this scene was included in the movie, so here it will just be a bit more fleshed out. We obviously still have Snape teaching about werewolves and setting them a giant essay, but we will also include the students as a whole defending Professor Lupin and standing up to Snape's bullying. I think it's really important to include this as it demonstrates that it's not just Harry who hates Snape, it's everyone. And the scene ends with Snape calling Hermione an insufferable know-it-all, to which Ron says,
"You asked us a question and she knows the answer. Why ask if you don't want to be told?"
This moment marks the end of Ron and Hermione's feud for now. We then cut to another exterior shot, this time of the Quidditch pitch at dawn, and the conditions are even worse than the day before. We then cut to Harry asleep in bed, twitching as a slight breeze is ruffling his hair. He wakes with a start and sees Peeves blowing in his ear, and after he swats him away, he gets out of bed and heads downstairs. On his way, he comes across Crookshanks trying to sneak into the boys' dormitory. Harry nudges Crookshanks back down the stairs, saying,
"Leave Scabbers alone."
Before we cut to the Gryffindor Quidditch team in the changing room, pulling on their Quidditch robes and staggering out into the storm for the match. Once again, this scene was obviously included in the movie, but it was only 2 minutes long, and I think we can allow for at least 10 minutes, if not more. This means that we'll include a lot of the moments from the match that the movie cut, as well as some additions to the atmosphere at the end of the match. The main addition, though, will be the first half of the game. We follow Harry as he flies around, trying to navigate the storm. However, through filming and editing techniques, we will be completely disoriented, just like Harry, into anything that is going on. He flies this way and that, being buffeted by the wind, and almost collides with numerous players as he can't see anything through his rain-splattered glasses. Eventually, we see Oliver Wood signalling at Harry to come down as he's called a time out, and we will then get the incredible moment from the book where Hermione appears out of nowhere and casts a repelling charm on Harry's glasses. The rest of the match will then be very similar to the movie, as 2 key things happen. Firstly, as Harry is looking for the snitch, he sees the silhouette of a giant black dog in the topmost stand, and as he is staring at it, he hears Oliver Wood shout his name and he sees Cedric Diggory streaking towards the snitch. Now in the movie, we get a kind of wild chase scene as the Dementors appear and essentially try to catch Harry, but this is different in the book, and it will be different here. As Harry is chasing after Cedric, the noise of the crowd and the storm start to fade, and with the power of editing, the music starts to fade too, and the colour palette becomes gloomier and gloomier. We hear the faint echo of a screaming woman before Harry looks down and sees at least 100 Dementors staring up at him. The screaming becomes louder and louder before Harry slips sideways off his broom and plummets towards the ground before we cut to black to end sequence 2. Sequence 3 opens up in the hospital wing in a similar way to the movie as Harry wakes up. Harry sees Ron and Hermione waiting for him, as well as the rest of the Gryffindor team, who go on to explain about the match. I especially want to include the moment where Harry asks where Wood is, and Fred says,
"Still in the showers. We think he's trying to drown himself."
I just really want to include as many moments as possible of Wood's fanatic obsession with Quidditch. They also add that Cedric Diggory felt incredibly guilty about catching the snitch, and even though this seems like a small moment, it is kind of important for Cedric's character, as well as with Amos Diggory in the next season. Finally, we have the incredibly sad moment that the movie actually nailed pretty perfectly, with Hermione tipping the remains of Harry's Nimbus 2000 onto the bed. We then move into our next Hogwarts changing motif from autumn to winter, with loads of Christmas decorations popping up around the school. This juxtaposes quite nicely from the previous moment with Harry and his broomstick, as usually Christmas at Hogwarts is the happiest time of the year, but this time Harry's feeling pretty down about everything regarding the Nimbus 2000, the Dementors, and not being able to go to Hogsmeade. We then cut to Defense Against the Dark Arts at the end of a lesson with Lupin about Hinky Punks. We won't actually watch this lesson because of time restraints, but it will definitely be cool to see the Hinky Punk at the front of the class, once again expanding upon Wizarding World lore by introducing a new creature. Before dismissing the class, Lupin goes on to tell the class to not worry, as he will speak to Professor Snape about them not doing his werewolf essay, and as they are leaving, he calls Harry to stay behind. We then have a brief conversation between Lupin and Harry, where Lupin asks about his broomstick and drops a major hint saying that the Whomping Willow was planted at Hogwarts the day he arrived. Harry goes on to ask Lupin if he can teach him how to repel Dementors, and Lupin agrees, but after the Christmas holidays. This is a perfect segue, as the next scene will be during the Christmas break, with Harry waving goodbye to Ron and Hermione as they head to Hogsmeade. On his way back to the Gryffindor common room, he is intercepted by Fred and George, and just like in the movie, we get the moment where they hand over the Marauders map. This will be almost identical to the movie, perhaps with the conversation just going on a little bit longer, with the twins going into a little more depth as to how they stole the map from Filch, and explaining that there are various passages out of Hogwarts, but there's only one that they use. Now in the movie, we cut straight to Harry entering Honeydukes. However, I want to include the moments before this of Harry's journey through the passage. We cut to Harry beside the one-eyed witch statue, and as he looks at the Marauders map, we see a mini animation of a tiny little Harry tapping the statue with his wand and saying Descendium. We then follow Harry and we have some pretty snappy claustrophobic shots of Harry making his way down a seemingly endless tunnel. I quite like how in the game Hogwarts Legacy, the passage to Hogsmeade is quite windy with various different obstacles to overcome. It was a pretty fun element of the game. However, in the book, it's described more like a straight line that goes on forever, and that's kind of what I would want to do for the series. Eventually, Harry makes his way up a steep incline before his head collides with solid stone, and as he reaches up, he pushes open a trap door and finds himself in the cellar of Honeydukes. Unlike in the movie, where Harry finds Ron and Hermione outside the Shrieking Shack, he finds them in Honeydukes examining different suites. He sneaks up behind them and reveals himself before they head out into Hogsmeade High Street. We will only get a brief glimpse of the exteriors of the different shops here, but not to worry, as unlike the movie, we will be returning to Hogsmeade again, seeing the interiors of different shops. Ron suggests that they should go to the Three Broomsticks for a butterbeer, and as they enter, we move into the climax scene of the episode. The trio head to the bar and order 3 butterbeers before they find a table next to a Christmas tree. However, as soon as they sit down, the door opens again, and in walks Cornelius Fudge, Professor Flitwick, Hagrid, and Professor McGonagall. Hermione quickly casts Wingardium Leviosa and moves the Christmas tree in front of them, whilst Ron shoves Harry under the table. The teachers, Fudge and Rosmerta, go on to have a conversation about the Dementors in the village, Sirius Black, and Black's backstory. Rosmerta says that she couldn't believe it when she heard that Black had turned to the dark side, and Fudge says it's even worse than she could have imagined. McGonagall goes on to ask Rosmerta if she remembers anything about Black at school, and asks her if she remembers who Black's best friend was. To which Rosmerta says,
"Naturally, quite the double act, Sirius Black and James Potter."
Harry drops his tankard in shock, we hold on his face before we cut to black, and the credits roll. I think this episode perfectly captures the turning point of this series, with more mysteries surrounding Sirius Black coming to light, and Harry really getting a grasp of everything that's going on around him. It also gives us more time with Lupin, develops the tension between Ron and Hermione, and expands the world with the Quidditch and Hogsmeade. And the ending revelation about Sirius Black raises the stakes even higher, setting up what is to come. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and once again, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like the video, and hit the notification bell so you're updated when I bring out my plan for Season 3, Episode 4 of Harry Potter.